Hey everybody, welcome back to Jay's Fifth Down, the football podcast. I'm your host, Jay Gay, here today with Nate Atkins. He is the beat writer for the Indy Star, covers the Indianapolis Colts for the NFL. Nate, I appreciate you coming on today to talk some football with us and see where the Indianapolis Colts are looking like going into 2022.
Yeah, glad to be here. It's they just wrapped up their offseason program, mini camp, OTAs, all that stuff. So as you can imagine, this is it's going to die down here, but it's been a lot of talk and a lot of excitement just about certain new quarterback that they have. So that was kind of the showcase mini camp.
Right. Yes. So before we get into that, make sure you guys check us out here on YouTube, also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your favorite podcast. Jay's Fifth Down. Make sure you guys share, like, comment, subscribe. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section as we move on throughout the podcast here. So Nate, first question for you, man. Looking back on the 2021 season for the Colts, before the season started, they grabbed Carson Wentz, from Philly, and they got him over there because the Colts have been through, I think, like 4 starting quarterbacks over the last 4 years or something like that, which is pretty crazy for an NFL team. But just looking back over the season of 2021, how would you sum it up for the Colts?
Oh, man, it was like the craziest roller coaster ever. So for a little background, I didn't get there until midseason. I joined the beat midseason, and so by the time I came in, they were kind of a 500 team. They had started 0-3, but they were very much on the rise. They had just blown out the Jets, and they kind of went on a little streak there where all of a sudden for maybe 5 or 6 weeks in there, Carson Wentz is playing pretty well. Jonathan Taylor's looking like the best running back in football. Their defense is forcing all kinds of turnovers. They got to a league high 7 Pro Bowlers. And, all of a sudden they're taking down the Bills in Buffalo. They take down the Patriots on prime time. They take down the Cardinals in prime time. And all of a sudden they're getting Super Bowl hype. So it's crazy to contrast that window with what they were at the beginning of the year when they started 0-3, and then what they were at the end of the year, which is just one of the most stunning collapses I will ever see those final 2 weeks. Losing to the Raiders at home by a field goal at the last second wasn't a huge deal at the time, it felt like. Another team that could make the playoffs, things happen. But, to not seal it there, and for this team to go into Jacksonville, which it always seems to go into Jacksonville and fall apart.
Right.
We knew it was always a possibility, but to collapse the way they did that day is one of the more stunning things I've ever seen, to the point where it made you wonder what we were looking at all season long. So overall, they finished 9-8, very up and down team, ultimately a flawed team, talented team by the end, but it was very hard to wrap your mind around exactly what that team was.
Yeah, and the Indianapolis Colts have been an interesting team over the last couple of years. Like I said before, they gone through a quarterback carousel like crazy. Before it was at one point, of course, Andrew Luck was the staple there at quarterback position, but then he retired in 2018, I believe it was, and then they brought in Jacoby Brissett was next up, and that didn't work out so well. So they changed quarterbacks again. And it's just been, and then of course Carson Wentz. And now they brought in Matt Ryan from the Falcons, traded with him, so bringing him there to Indianapolis. So overall, I just think the Colts, again, it's like they're a middle of the pack team. They're very talented on both ends. Obviously, you got one of the best offensive lines in football. And obviously, I think the best running back in the NFL is Jonathan Taylor. The kid is amazing. He's a stud. I believe he should have been MVP this year. He's definitely a candidate to make it, to get that award. But they are an interesting middle of the pack team. They're not horrible like the Jets or the Jaguars, but then again, they're not one of the better teams. They're just in the middle, in the middle of the pack, and their defense has been good. I just think something's missing to propel this team to the next level, So judging through the offseason, and them grabbing Matt Ryan and those moves they made, what are your thoughts on that, and how have they finally found their quarterback?
Well, I think they were definitely in the middle of the pack last season. Like we said, the ultimate outcome is they finished 9-8. They had great moments, they had terrible moments. And ultimately, they're a team that finished top 10 in defense, top 10 in special teams, top 10 in run game. And they went 9-8 because their passing game fell apart. The final 7 games, they averaged 169 yards a game. That's
that's not going to cut it.
Here. So I think it's pretty obvious what they were missing for the most part was a quarterback, but also, some better. They could have used some better receivers too. But also, they lacked a killer instinct on defense. So they had a defense that would force some turnovers. Darius Leonard was amazing at it. Had 3 Pro Bowlers on that defense, but they didn't have that pass rush that closed games out. So they had, I believe, 3 different games they lost where they had double-digit leads in the fourth quarter and blew them all.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, I know. Matt Ryan's going from Atlanta to another team that's done that. But that was part of the argument, though. So when they got Matt Ryan, that was step one of addressing the passing game. The whole idea is you've got to support Matt Ryan. This can't just be he's going to come here and just wash away everything that went wrong. So you notice that I think it was right before they got Matt Ryan is when they traded for Yannick Ngakoue.
Yep, that's right, from the Raiders.
That's one pass rusher who averages 9 sacks a year, is an easy fit in their new scheme under Gus Bradley. And then the next one, the real move I felt like they made to complement Matt Ryan was signing Stephon Gilmore. Paying a cornerback like $12 million a year, that is not something this team normally does.
That
was a kind of next level move, but that was them saying, we feel like we have the quarterback now. We promised him the whole way they got Matt Ryan here was they were the team to say that we're ready to kind of do a version of what the Rams did with Matthew Stafford. Maybe they won't be quite that aggressive.
Yeah.
But they're trying to show them like we're going to make a good effort. This is not like we're not just coasting here. We want to do what we can do, and so they brought in the 2019 NFL Defensive Player of the Year, 5-time Pro Bowler Stephon Gilmore, and so you match Gilmore with Ngakoue, should in theory turn this defense from top 10 to theoretically top 5 if it all comes together, and then it all comes down to how Matt Ryan and these very young wide receivers, talented but mostly unproven wide receivers, can kind of come together because we know what they have in the run game. They've got great special teams. They've got a good offensive line. They've got a good coaching staff. So they think that they've gone to the levels they need to go to. We will see. There's certainly some nitpick you can make at wide receiver, but I think they've made some effort at all the areas where they were really held back last year.
Yeah, definitely. And like we said, the receiver position was an interesting spot for the Colts because as I watched them last year, and I did watch the Colts, I did pay attention to them a little bit last year. Just overall, of course, T.Y. Hilton, I think he was banged up a lot, but he's been a staple there at the receiver position in Indy for quite some time, and then, of course, they drafted Pittman, I love Pittman. He's a good talent. He can catch the ball. He's got good height, good size. I think he's going to be a superstar there in Indy over his career, and that was a great pickup for them in the draft when they got Pittman, and so then, of course, adding Jonathan Taylor as well. I think the Indianapolis Colts are building something special. I really do. They're kind of shifting out of that old culture there that they had in Indy with Peyton Manning and, that through Andrew Luck and now moving into something else. And like you said, the Rams-esque type of move, bringing in that veteran quarterback, complementing him with good other pieces on offense and defense. So, they're trying to build something there and they're trying to go and get a Super Bowl. And the Colts believe, and from what I hear, they believe they have the team to do it. Interesting, but now, overall, Nate, let me ask you, man, do you believe that the Indianapolis Colts within the next 2 years can make it to that big game? Can they make it there? Do you honestly believe they can?
Yeah, I think they can because I think a lot of getting to that game is the route that you have to take to get there. So there's all this talk about how many good teams are on the AFC, how many great quarterbacks there are, how many of those teams are really doing the same. The Rams have inspired a lot of teams to really put the pedal to the floor when you have that quarterback. But the reality is like the Colts don't have to deal with all of those teams. They have to deal mostly with the teams in their division. The AFC South is pretty watered down. It's got Jaguars and Texans who are very clearly rebuilding.
Yes.
And for the Titans, the Titans are a team that that had their number. But, but that's 2 games they lost to the Titans last year, the 2 worst games Carson Wentz played before the Jacksonville one. I mean, he lost both of those games on turnovers. So the idea is, you should be able to play well enough to beat a Ryan Tannehill-led team, especially they traded away A.J. Brown. So they're while the Colts are trying to go for it right now, the Titans are the opposite. They're saying, we don't really have the quarterback to go for it. So we're going to just kind of coast and set ourselves up in the future. So really what I'm getting at is that like the AFC West is absolutely loaded. You know, all four of those teams have stud quarterbacks and great rosters, but like the Colts don't have to deal with all those. They may have to deal with one or two in the playoffs, but if they can win the AFC South, they'll get a home playoff game. If they get a home playoff game, if they win enough games, they can get to either they could win one and go to the AFC Championship game, depending on how it shakes out. Right. But ultimately, they got to take the route that the Bengals just took in the Super Bowl, which was the Bengals were not. Nobody at this time last year saw the Bengals as in
nope,
Super Bowl.
Not at all.
But what they had was they had the right quarterback, and again, we'll see if how much Matt Ryan has left. I'm not saying he's Joe Burrow or that they have Jamar Chase, but they were able to overcome a lot of flaws, partly because they won a division. They won one playoff game at home. They survived the Raiders in that game, and they got rolling. And that's really what it's about is can you play your best football? Can you play your most confident football in January? Can you set yourself up in good situations with a home playoff game against a team you're better than? The Colts can do that. They have all the means to do that. Their route, I think they've been slept on because if you just stack them up against the Broncos, the Raiders, the Chiefs, they're not as strong, the Chargers. But they're not in that division. They're in a totally different world, and I absolutely think that they have the makings of a team that can make the Super Bowl for sure.
Oh yeah, you know, and I agree with you, man. As we said, the roster is overall constructed pretty well. I got to give credit to that Colts front office and Frank Reich and those guys for how they have drafted and brought in people from outside, whether it's free agency or trades, how they built the roster overall. Like you said, getting Yannick Ngakoue, that's a huge move, and Ngakoue is a guy that hasn't really been in the limelight the last couple of years since he left Jacksonville a while back ago. He went to the Raiders last year. He had a productive season. I believe you said he finished with 9 sacks, and so that's still good. That's good pass rushing, and the Colts is really, that's what they've been missing, I believe, is that top pass, that guy that can just go after and get the quarterback, because now that's what you need. We're in a passing league, which means defensively, you got to get the quarterback on the ground. That's a huge part of it, and so I believe once they really get that whole defensive line shored up and they, be able to get after the quarterback, get pressure, get stops, and get Matt Ryan and those guys on offense more and more chances out on the field for them to go score, there's a chance, for them to go really far. And that offense, man, I mean, it's going to be, from what I hear, those guys are bought into Matt. They really love him up there. Nahim Hines, especially, he said he believes Matt's going to be great over there. So overall, man, it looks like the Colts are headed in the right direction for a long time. They're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, well, that's what's curious. We'll see how long it is, because Matt Ryan did just turn 37 years old.
He did.
And the joke in the building, they're telling him happy 40th birthday. He's actually one of the younger teams in the NFL. I want to say they have 5 guys who are 30 or older. They have like 6 players, 7 players have ever played in the Super Bowl, and almost all of them just arrived. So this is a homegrown roster. That's probably what held them back a little bit in recent seasons, is maybe not quite that. They didn't have the Stephon Gilmore, the Matt Ryan, the Yannick Ngakoue, guys who've played in the playoffs and done these things and won those clutch games. So now they have it. We'll see how long it lasts. I mean, I think the only question I have with Matt Ryan is how long is this going to work? Because when the bottom drops out on old quarterbacks, as we saw with Peyton Manning, sometimes Drew Brees, sometimes it just falls out. So, but right now, looking at him in mini camp and OTAs and everything, like the passes, they're as accurate as they've ever been. He's got a gorgeous deep ball still. He doesn't have Josh Allen's arm, but I don't think he'll need that, the way that they scheme up play action and the way that some of their fast, big receivers can get down the field. So they've got a great thing going right now. We'll see how quickly it all comes together, and then ultimately how long they can keep it together.
Yeah. And last season, now under an abysmal offensive line here in Atlanta, Ryan finished with 67% completion percentage. He finished with 20 touchdowns and 12 interceptions on the year. In Atlanta, he played all 17 games. So and Atlanta was one of the teams actually in the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes, right? We thought we were going to get Deshaun, and maybe that's kind of what there's rumblings that maybe got him Matt like, hey, okay.
Oh, yeah, it did. Well, that's the thing is Falcons went from thinking they might get Deshaun Watson to not even having Matt Ryan anymore. Right. So I don't have to relitigate that for you, but it was that did not age very well. But it's a good lesson that like things do end after a while, and that's what the Colts had to realize too. They had Peyton Manning for and Andrew Luck back to back for
Hmm.
like 20 years. Like, oh, there's some Colts fans that are like my age. I'm 30. All they knew for a longest time is we have a franchise quarterback, and that's forever and amen. They didn't know what it was like to be most of the NFL that is banging their head against the wall trying to find that guy. So the past 4 years, they've had four different starting quarterbacks. It's driven them crazy. The Falcons, I'm not saying anyone took for granted Matt Ryan, but I think nationally they did. They realized like to have a guy start 14 seasons like he did, to go through, I think he had four head coaches, you know, to
A lot
to
of
do
offense
all the things he
coordinators.
did. I mean, he's seen Julio Jones come into the league and basically leave the league in terms of any relevance. Like he's survived entire careers of good players, and it's been that stable rock. And it's easy to take for granted once that's the one thing you have, but you certainly notice it when it's not there.
Yeah, you do. And as a Falcons fan, man, it's football is a game played by 22 players, 11 on offense, 11 on defense. And most of the narrative is like at the end of the day, our offense wasn't as great, in the past couple of seasons, but our defense wasn't either. So I can't. Matt Ryan didn't play defense. Or Matt Ryan didn't play special teams. So a lot of fans like to pin all of their losses on him, which I think is kind of crazy because it's like quarterback can't go out there and do everything.
Well, the stat I noticed is that he finished, or the Falcons were in the bottom two of rushing offense and defense last year.
Yes.
So I don't know like Matt Ryan, if he's not Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen. There's about three or four quarterbacks who can make up for that kind of just team wide ineptitude. So it's amazing to me that, to be honest, that they won 7 games last year. Not only with that, but Julio Jones gone. Calvin Ridley played like 5 games.
Yeah.
Again, Kyle Pitts is one of the most incredible rookies I've seen. It's still a rookie tight end, right? And he's scored 1 touchdown like that. That if that's like your entire passing game is old quarterback trying to run from pressure and throw to a rookie tight end, like that, it's not going to work. So
Yeah.
I thought it was an accomplishment. Some people would look at it and say, "Oh, the Falcons only won 7 games. Matt had 26 touchdowns." They look at that as like a negative. I looked at that as a positive because that really should have been so much worse. If he really had lost it, if he had aged and just lost it in those settings and the players around him, I think they would have won 2 or 3 games. And instead, they won 7 games.
Yeah, and not to mention they were operating under a new regime. Of course, they got rid of Dan Quinn, Thomas Dimitrov, bringing in Arthur Smith, Terry Fontenot. So it was a whole new regime, trying to build a new culture. And just trying to bring in that a new sense of camaraderie along the teammates. Bringing in guys like Patterson, right? Who was pretty much our only him and Pitts for the whole offense. Him, Matt, and Kyle Pitts were the only offense we had pretty much last year, which was really abysmal. But moving forward, we got Marcus Mariota and drafted Desmond Ritter. So I don't expect anything from the Falcons this year. Maybe in the next couple of years, though, maybe we'll be where the Colts are, in talks to be in the big game one day. But moving forward, man, so taking from the 2021 season, moving into 2022, what do you think the Colts can build on, and take into the next season after looking at the positives from the 2021 season?
I think the biggest thing is they're just trying to find a way to keep what they have in the run game and make it matter more. So, like, there were moments when, I mean, this run game was absolutely unbelievable in the second half of the season. Like, you watched them go into Buffalo, and that was a rainy, dreary game. Like, it was set up for usually dome teams, as you know, with the Falcons and the Colts have been here. Usually they don't do well in those settings when they have to get out of a dome and play like that.
Yeah.
And the Bills are used to it. The Colts dominated that game because they had this offensive line that was punishing downhill, and Jonathan Taylor was just on another level. And the scripts that they drew up, the way that they could get him out on the edge, balancing with Nahim Hines was incredible. And that's how he ran. He not only led the league in rushing yards and rushing touchdowns, but every advanced metric he looked to as far as kind of what, yards over expected. I mean, Jonathan Taylor was so out in front of everybody. The problem is that at some point, that can't be all your team is in 2022 in the NFL, because some team can eventually say, okay, we're just going to put 9 players in the box and you're going to have to do something about it. And a competent passing game should torch those teams. And that was the biggest indictment on Carson Wentz and the receivers and everything else, is that they got those looks and they couldn't do anything about it. So Jonathan Taylor, as amazing as he is, like any running back, is not going to carry an entire team. But now, if you can mix Jonathan Taylor with a quarterback who can play off that, who can read pre-snap, who can see when the defense is stacked 9 in the box, so that means the deep ball is open because there's not 2 high safeties, or the slot's going to be open because defense is in base and they've got a linebacker trying to cover Nahim Hines, and it's man coverage. But there's all these things that Matt Ryan, he's in that PhD level of quarterbacking, can do that they just haven't had for the past couple of years. And ever since they had it with Phillip Rivers for a little bit, but it was limited deep ball and all that. But they've not really had like a good physical quarterback who also had that mental edge to him. So I think they just got to find ways to maintain what they are. And so a lot of that's keeping Jonathan Taylor healthy. So some of it's they've got to, they ran him more than they wanted to last year. That was the indictment of the passing game. So the idea is run him less, but have him be more efficient, get him the ball more in the passing game where he can get away from, the defensive tackles and linebackers and get along the sidelines, because he had a couple of the top marks in the league as far as speed carrying the ball. Like, he's one of the fastest, most explosive players. They got to get him on the edge more. So the more they can do that, Nahim Hines is another very creative player. It's like their version of Cordarrelle Patterson, even though they're incredibly different size. Nahim's only 5'9", but it's this idea of a guy that's basically a hybrid return man, running back, wide receiver that you just use in a bunch of schemable ways. So they've always had a good role for him. It went away again last year late. It just didn't jive with Carson Wentz. But that's something that, watching how Matt operated with Cordarrelle Patterson, watching him work with Nahim Hines in the spring, I'm pretty positive that that's going to be a good connection. So if they just keep a lot of that together, and then a defense that is changing schemes but has a lot of the same, almost all the same leaders outside of Stephon Gilmore joining, if they can still force turnovers at the rate they've managed to do every year, like, a lot of this is set up in their favor. Again, it's all going to come down to when they get those 9-man looks, those 9-man boxes against Jonathan Taylor, is Matt Ryan and these new receivers, can they kill him? That is the whole question of their season. If they can do that, the sky's kind of the limit for them. If they can't do that, then they're like a lot of teams in the NFL, where you may look good for a certain week or a certain stretch. You're not ultimately a contender, though, if you can't do that.
Right. Yeah, and I think that was like what you mentioned there, is that how long can they do that, right? So looking at the Cardinals, right, they started off 7-0 last season, and then it just kind of derailed from that point on, right? So it's just a matter of you have to stay consistent at this level, and I mean, it's very important to stay consistent, that not only for the team and for your playoff season, but just just to keep the guys in the locker room, with good morale, right? So it's important that they maintain a good stretch for the long season. So that's just something I looked into, man, and that's important, I believe. And I think the Colts really are going to be a different team next year. I really believe that, it's going to be more exciting with of course, the passing game. And you mentioned, with Jonathan Taylor and Nahim Hines, and how can they get those two more involved in the passing game? That'll be really good, and because running back, I mean, before Jonathan Taylor, it was Marlon Mack, and he didn't really pan out like they wanted him to. But they kept Nahim Hines around, and then, of course, bringing in Jonathan Taylor, who's turned into like this, this beast, like before our eyes. Like, when he was getting drafted, I was like, okay, he'll be good, but, this dude's like, MVP candidate, like, his first season. It's crazy. So the sky is the limit for him and that team. So, but Nate, that about wraps up here for the podcast, man. Jay's Fifth Down. I appreciate you coming on, talking some Colts football with us. You guys can catch Nate out there on Twitter. And this is going to be an interesting NFL season 2022. I look forward to it. I got to keep an eye on the Colts from Nate here. We'll see how Matt Ryan fizzles out up there, and how that defense fizzles out as well. So, Nate, I appreciate you coming on, talking some ball with us today, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Anytime.
All right. You take it easy, man.
Yep, you too.
All right.